It's the 31st of August, the very, very last day of August. I'm Dana Durnford, the nuclear proctologist.org, and you can call in tonight at 709-589-4406. That's 709-589-4406. Hope everybody's doing good. Too bad we can't say the same thing about all the animals and birds and insects. I've done over 40 of these types of presentations where we strung together recent die-offs, extinction events of species, but Alphabet, aka Google, took down my site with 1,600 of these presentations a few weeks ago, and so we have a humble new site, a cooler site, where censorship rules today. This site is censored heavily, So we're going to cover the recent news for the last 2 months or something like that of whales and bears and seals and birds and insects, species die-offs. We've done a count. They're supposed to have 1,000 tanks at Japan's nuclear meltdowns. This is why the die-offs are actually happening. As you'll see if you hang around, I'll show you the documentation. They said they got 1,000 tanks. Of course, they had 1,000 tanks in 2013. They had 1,200 in 2014. They had 900 in 2017. They had 1,000 in 2020 and 1,000 in 2021. 1,000 in 2013, 1,000 in 2021. And so they're trying to trick you into thinking that they're not killing the ocean. I can assure you they killed not just the Pacific, where we done 6 expeditions to Alaska on the coastline and species counts for 4 to 5 months at a time without going home, right? So we only counted less than 700 tanks, and a lot of them were small tanks, by the way, not 1,000. Over the last couple of years, we've seen minke whale unusual mortality events, gray whale, and these are still ongoing, by the way, unusual mortality events, humpback whale mortality events. We've seen the Atlantic right whale unusual mortality events, birds and everything else. Matriarch of well-known orca family is starving to death, BC researchers fear. Now that's 2019. Is starving to death. That's important for the rest of the show, just to, because they took down all 1,600 of my videos in my website with 24,000 subscribers, so it's kind of hard to direct you to those videos. I got to kind of invoke some of this stuff. Hi everybody, welcome everyone. So now this has become a spectacle. Since 2011, Fukushima nuclear meltdown, we have seen a surge of species die-off worldwide. And I'll connect it up for you. Another adult southern resident killer whale in her calf found in poor health. That's 2019. I just laid a groundwork. The adult is showing conditions of a peanut head, significant loss of fat, blubber. They're going from 12 inches of blubber down to 3, and then they die. It's called emaciated. And then the ocean currents are one thing, but we have plumes of radiation cover the entire northern hemisphere. So it's not just the ocean itself. And that will be self-explanatory as you watch this. In 2018, there was continues for another summer. This was actually 6 years in a row right now. All the birds in Alaska, and there was over 1 million Cassini auklets and 1 million common murres found, were emaciated and had starved to death. In order for bird, and it wasn't just Cassini auklets, there were storm petros, and we have fulmars, shearwaters, kittiwakes, auklets, There was a million of them, the Cassini auklets, puffins, the common murre was over, it's actually 1.4 million or something, were emaciated, all of them. And the kittiwakes, or the storm pet shows, about 70 kilometers away from me, is the biggest storm pet show colony on the planet, breeding colony, with 6.6 million birds, 3.3 million breeding pairs. I went out there last year 4 times in the dark because they're nocturnal. I couldn't find them. I tried to go this morning, but it was too rough to get out there. You got to get out there before daylight on top of that. And I'm waiting for parts to come in for the outboard engine. It works fine. It's just the sensor's gone, so it restricts me at 3,000 RPM. Whatever, we'll sort it out. Just to kind of get you up to speed as we jump into this. Fukushima plume showed 1 million becquerels a square meter. This was the Xenon 133. Now, I know this is hard for a lot of people to wrap their mind around for some reason, but you can see this is NOAA's model, by the way. But radiation also affects insects and birds, and animals, and mammals. I know, right? Who would have thought? In fact, they're much more vulnerable. And then emaciated bears in British Columbia. This is an ongoing story. Once again, they took down my site a few weeks ago with 24,000 subscribers, 1,600 videos. About 40 of them were these types of presentations you're seeing tonight. And so I'm going to have to do a whole batch to get everybody back up to speed again. Emaciated grizzly bears, they're trying to blame it on salmon. See that there? But did you know that a grizzly bear, 90% of his diet is grass and berries and roots, not salmon? They're doing the same thing with the killer whales, where they're claiming the killer whales only eat salmon. And if you can't get the salmon, they'll go on a hunger strike. They're doing the same thing with the bears in this story here, where they're claiming the salmon are why the bears are emaciated. No, they're emaciated because the berries bioaccumulate the radiation. They're like shellfish, where they bioaccumulated 115,000 times more than background, because they're filter feeders, right? So 5 million sockeye salmon never showed up. 600,000 came, and the grizzly bears bearing the brunt of it. But grizzly bears, 90% of their diet is not salmon at all. And a lot of them don't eat salmon because they're too far inland, right? And so grizzly bears are bearing the brunt of it. They're trying to blame it on salmon, which is simply not. Here's a study showing the radiation hurting the humans over there. And here's another model of the radioactive fallout. This is Hawaii. So it only takes about 7 days for the plume to cover the entire Pacific. By day 10 and 12, it's covered most of the northern hemisphere, all of the United States. A lot of that's going to wash back down to the coastline. You can see this is a continuous plume. And so this rained out heavily, and the plumes would wash back down, continuously washing down to the coastline, and that'll go on for 1,000 years. That includes the radioactive pollen and everything else. Mysterious mass deaths of, and I think this is the last one before we jump into the regular news cycle. Yeah, it is. I'm just setting the stage so you can appreciate this. This is just a tiny, itty-bitty fraction of what I've already covered. And we're going to cover the recent stuff right away here. Tens of thousands of dead birds washing up on beaches. Prince William Sound, Alaska. Mysterious mass deaths of Alaska bird baffles scientists. Birds, all of the species known as the common murres, was 1.4 million. Now, they dive 600 feet all day long. They feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and herring, etc., etc., etc. Feeder fish, right? Up the food chain, feeder fish. They have examined the birds and say they appear emaciated. We know they are starving because their stomachs are empty. No, all their muscle is gone. Their body fat is gone, and they just drop They are emaciated. They died of starvation. So at ground zero in Japan, no sparrows, no birds, downtown void of any form of birds whatsoever. We're seeing that now. I just came back from a research expedition counting insects and birds, and we haven't seen a flock of birds this year whatsoever. Not a single flock of birds. And I'm actually in the migratory capital of the planet where there's 45 million migratory seabirds come past each year. Maybe talk about that a bit later. Tends to concentrate on the testicles. So this was a study, and this is a France's model of the radioactive fallout. This is the Atlantic, where my finger is to. Over there is the Pacific Ocean. That's the Northern Hemisphere. That's America, Canada, Iceland, Greenland, Europe. Both Atlantic and Pacific covered, buried in a continuous plume sustained for many months of radioactive fallout. So it broke the food chain. The first thing we're going to see destroyed would be the phytoplankton, the zooplankton. The phytoplankton, of course, is the basis of the food chain. The oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain, was annihilated because they live at the surface. And a lot of this stuff is brought back up to the surface repeatedly. And we know that it was suspended from the surface to the ocean floor, and that's going to be permanent. That's actually, by the way, called global warming. It's a continuous plume of radiation pulsing energy at the speed of light every second for millions of years now. So the planet has to get warmer constantly because that doesn't turn to fairy dust for a million years. Okay, so fin whale that died suffered underlying conditions. We've covered a lot of these stories. Turns out fin whale that washed up. Now, fin whales are generally a thin whale. They're very unusual because they are very big whales, by the way. But they're generally a thin-looking type whale. But this one was actually empty stomach, and it was emaciated. Actually emaciated. And then, of course, now it's more susceptible to pathogens and viruses and illnesses and diseases would normally not be able to affect it because its entire immune system is compromised, right? So infections in the liver, the lungs, the kidneys, which we're seeing happening to humans dramatically since Fukushima, by the way, right? Heart problems, liver problems, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, Down syndrome, diabetes, schizophrenia. There's 1,800 illnesses known to affect humans from radioactive fallout. That's going to be the same thing for animals and birds and mammals and insects included. They said the whale's thin body, empty stomach suggested it had been impaired. It was drinking hay gale, Dana. Yeah. The whale had significant parasite infections in the liver, lungs, kidneys. Additionally, said the whale's thin body, empty stomach suggested it hadn't eaten recently. No, it was emaciated. So for a whale to be emaciated, it has to to show up somewhere. It means it traveled 6,000-7,000 kilometers without eating. And so it used up all its blubber. So it goes from 12 inches of blubber to 3 inches of blubber. This is another model of the radioactive fallout. They're only acknowledging xenon, but you have to extrapolate all the other isotopes. Inhaling just one hot particle can cause a cancer, by the way. Top Colombian medical professor. So it's hard for all the mammals, animals, insects, birds, etc. in these massive plumes not to suck in at least one hot atom. And everything from a nuclear meltdown is a hot atom, right? Everything. This study here, I'm kind of... I can't say it without vomiting or just laughing. I told my sister this today, and she has no clue about this topic, basically. She looked at me and she said, "That's not true. Nobody done that. Nobody said that." I said, no, honest to God, that's the study. Emaciated whales are 3 times more likely to die than a healthy whale. So if you thought you couldn't feel more stupid, then you should go read that, because that'll just leave you just literally hopeless after you read that. So emaciated whales, in this case they're talking about orcas, because they can get big funding when you talk about orcas, right? So orcas are no different than any other whale, okay? They're a whale. They're just, everything about it is the same, except they got more teeth than most whales. But they're a whale. That's in that context, right? And emaciated orca are 3 times more likely to die than one that's not emaciated. Read it and weep. That's the academic for you. Oh, hang on. So that reminds me, that one there, skinny orcas or emaciated orcas or whales are 3 times more likely to die than healthy whales. Reminds me of that headline, as ocean rises, so does the risk of breast cancer. So what does ocean rising got to do with breast cancer? Nothing. And just want to go put a nail in my forehead after I read that one. I was like, I don't deserve to be on this planet. It's skinny southern resident killer whales are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in the next year, because they're setting the stage, right? Gee, why have all the killer whales died? Oh, because they're skinny. Just like, I taped my fingers together so I wouldn't poke myself in the eye after I originally read that. Tends to concentrate in the testicles. So think of this plume covering, now I've done research expeditions and I covered the killer whales year after year after year all along the coastlines. So this plume model of the radioactive fallout tends to, and then you see how the reproduction works. 360 atoms of radioactive sulfur peroxide, hydrogen buckyballs. They're created by spraying salt water on the nuclear meltdowns. And so it destroys the food chain, radiates the food chain. The whale is bioaccumulating. Because a killer whale, think of a killer whale as like a spider. And because we do expeditions, 5 expeditions this year, and the spiders are missing. They're actually missing here on the east coast of Canada. Also, we know this is true in Nova Scotia because we talked to researchers from there. And then the typical square meter would have 150 spiders in it. And an acre would have 500,000 plus, right? And we can't find a single spider in the forest or the trees all summer long because of the radioactive fallout. Because I'm right where my finger is right now. We've done multiple expeditions in the Pacific Ocean. We're now in the Atlantic. And so when radiation concentrates, the sulfur is created. This is a weird phenomenon where they spray salt water on 9,000 degree Fahrenheit nuclear meltdown reactors. This what they call curium. And the salt water is liberated as a spherical balls, like little soccer balls. And they ingest the hot particles and become very mobile, but they're very hot particles, very energetic hot particles. And think about how radiation actually works. It's pulsing energy almost the speed of light every second or so. So it's an engine. So it's able to propel the radiation right around the entire planet, right? And forest fires will liberate this radiation back into the environment because it sequesters in the trees and everything. We're getting there. Once we start rolling now, we're rolling. So these are little clips I've made over the years of different subjects. I got thrown in here to... Sorry to bug you, but insects are in decline. Insects are in decline. And they see this now, of course, right away in Japan, where there's very few insects and only 2 birds. They were wiped out right away. But once again, you got to think about this radioactive fallout, how it covers the northern hemisphere right away. Within 14 or 15 days, both the Pacific, the northern hemisphere, the Atlantic Ocean is covered in radiation. So when you see headlines like that there about Japan, that's applicable to anywhere in this radioactive plume that you're looking at behind me here, which is the entire northern hemisphere. And this is why we're seeing this mass species die-offs. Okay. We hear that the pollinators in dire straits why harmful invasive insects seem to be proliferating. Some species, if they don't have their natural predators, okay, so let me put this another way. Like mosquitoes are like squid or herring for the ocean. So squid and herring feeds a large population of mammals and animals, or birds and mammals, right, in the ocean, migratory. A large percentage of insects, like mosquitoes, are the same way for birds. So there was a study showing 60 birds' nests with a couple of eggs in each nest over 22 days, raised the hatchlings, rather, accumulated over 5.8 million insects. That's what it took to raise the hatchlings from 60 birds' nests. And so certain insects are feeder insects. They feed a big population. They'll feed dragonflies, will eat them. Frogs will eat them. All kinds of other bird species will eat them. If those species are not there, then those breeders will proliferate dramatically, right? They were a major part of the ecosystem. And so when their predators disappear, they become proliferating, so to speak. Now, we found very few bumblebees or wasps last year and this year on the research expeditions. In one spot this year, we found a dramatic, wait for it, a massive amount compared to the entire, more than last year total, was 23 insects in just about a quarter-mile stretch. This year we actually found was amazing. Last year we never had a single bird visit our campsites. This year we had a couple actually visit and took food out of my hand several hundred kilometers away out when I was camping, because we went 450 kilometers inland camping. Well, we being me and you, the people that supported me. In recent years, scientists have begun sounding an alarm on a suspected insect apocalypse. Now, I've been covering that for many years, many years, and we've seen throughout Vancouver all the way to Alaska almost a complete annihilation of the insect population, and an extinction event is the only way to describe it, of the 7,500 highly visible species in the tidal zones. There's usually around 30,000 species of highly visible insects at the high tide line in the first 100 feet from the coastline. They were wiped out completely. And we've done interior insect counts over the last number of years. And this year in particular was brutal. Literally, we just found mosquitoes, a few moths, but not many. This year we've seen probably 40 dragonflies. And I talked to fisheries and oceans, and they were telling me that they should be beaten off they used to beat off their helmet every day until a number of years ago. They just randomly disappeared for the most part. Suffering steep decline globally, both in diversity and abundance globally. So these radioactive plumes, because that's the Pacific over, this is the Atlantic Ocean, that's Europe would be over here. I'm up right there currently, but I also done the West Coast many years since Fukushima doing species counts, right? And so globally, the plume model stops for most of them after a few weeks, right? But if they leave the plumes running, they're going to cover the entire planet. So this is globally. And Shakespeare Bay, they talked about. Shakespeare Bay, of course, with the nuclear power plant, they were the military was in Shakespeare Bay, was also doing depleted uranium munition, using it in Shakespeare Bay. And radioactive releases from the nuclear power plant at Shakespeare Bay. And when you see all these dead zones in the oceans, they actually correlate with nuclear dumping over the last number of decades, 7 decades or so. For many decades, the British and many different countries would just drive around in the ocean throwing barrels of highly level radioactive waste over the side of the boat. And if they didn't sink, they would shoot them. They're all crazy, every one of them. Let's keep it rolling here. And Dana Durnford is talking about massive clouds, fire clouds from California fires. And California absorbed a lot of the radioactive fallout. And you can see it in these maps here. California also has a long history of recording pollution from Asia. And so it comes over, a lot of it, like these particles were way bigger than the radiation from Fukushima, by the way. And so if the big particles make it, the small particles have no problems. Of course, the models clearly show they do. But the pollution from Asia, from industry, is added to the California pollution indexes, pre-Fukushima. Because post-Fukushima, they don't even mention it anymore. They don't want you to understand that facet of that, how that the prevailing winds blow across the Pacific from Asia. Major Japan newspaper, mutations in nearly every fir tree. Insects with missing legs or crooked abnormalities found in monkeys, fishes, and frogs. While the radioactive plume covers the entire northern hemisphere, so you expect to see similar things happening. If it's happening around the nuclear meltdowns in Japan itself, because it's covered in radioactive materials, it's happening in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. New study reveals death mutations increase sharply from exposure to Fukushima, especially at low doses. There is no low doses from a nuclear meltdown. Everything is a hot particle. Small levels of cesium, which of course may be significantly toxic. In other words, things don't look good for animals living around Fukushima. What you got to realize about that is that cesium is a tracer. So for every cesium isotope, you should find 90 strontium-90 isotopes. It's like iodine-131. And they had 220 million iodine-131 particles per liter of rainwater falling on America and Canada. You expect to find, because that's how the ratio works, you can do an extrapolations. So there's going to be 10 times more iodine-132 in that same sample. 30 times more iodine-133 in that same sample. 31 times more iodine-129 in that same sample. And we do got the studies to back that up, by the way. But iodine-132 and 133 is 9 times more effective at ionizing and irradiating the thyroid gland than the 131, which is extremely effective at doing it. But they don't tell you about the 132 and the 133. And that's what I mean by cesium. You're doing a mathematical extrapolation. But cesium is also used to manipulate and deceive the population. And so animals, birds, and insects and mammals have thyroid glands. So it absorbs all kinds of radiation, not just iodine. Cesium is also going to go into thyroid too, see? And what happens is your thyroid takes it, the animals and insects and birds and mammals' thyroids will take the radiation and convert it into a hormone. Right? So you got a radioactive hormone being distributed out through the body because it has similar attributes to natural stuff. They knew this, right? They knew this a long time ago. Light pollution from street lamps. BBC, of course, had Jimmy Savile, who raped over 100 little children at the BBC. They're disgusting. BBC is disgusting. So when BBC tells you something, you really better... It's not worth repeating. It is worth, though, scrutinizing. So when they talk about that, light pollution, they're trying to blame light pollution on the insect loss in a country that still has an ongoing nuclear meltdown from Windscale. They changed the name of Windscale to Sellafield to hide the nuclear meltdown, for goodness sakes. And Windscale is surrounded, even today, by, as far as the eyes can see, farms that are producing food around nuclear meltdowns. It's absurd. Scientists say light pollution may be contributing to a worrying decline in insects in recent decades. It's not decades, it's 2000 since the nuclear meltdown down there. So if you look at around Sellafield, for instance, not around Sellafield, but because of Sellafield, you see stillbirths among the offsprings of males, workers at Sellafield. You see discharges, routine atmospheric discharges, routine, from nuclear meltdown Sellafield. The legacy of Sellafield. Plutonium has been discharged from Sellafield, aka Windscale, since 1952, is why the insects and the species, all the species, birds and everything else, have been declining down around the United Kingdom. And, like Chernobyl, after Chernobyl, they actually closed 9,000 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. 9,000. 9,000 farms. 400 are still closed today, 35 years later. So, unraveling 5 decades of anthropogenic man-made uranium discharges from a fuel reprocessing, this mixed oxide fuel facility. So they're taking nuclear missiles and nuclear fuel from other countries, by the way, reclaiming the hot particles because they don't want to store it, see? So they make it into fuel, which is called MOX fuel, mixed oxide fuel, and they burn it in a reactor, literally. And that's releasing nothing but hot particles. And when they put it into the spent fuel pools, there's no containment, of course. And that goes on for decades, hemorrhaging, because it's still splitting the atom for thousands of years. It's going to sit in pools for a couple of decades because it's so hot, because it's splitting the atom. All of those isotopes are liberated to the environment all day long. It's the same amount as was powering the plant. It becomes fragile, right? So they can't keep using it for fuel. They've only used up about 5% of the fuel. And so then they put it in a pool. It boils off about 120,000 liters a day. Each liter is trillions of atoms is released into the environment. And all pools, fuel pools worldwide, are doing that. This is a genocide machine. It's an incredible death cult. Assessment of prospective food chain doses from radioactive discharges from Sellafield. There is no safe level. A single atom sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Your body attacks you for the rest of your life with white blood cells. Non-stop for the rest of your life. By the way, that displaces the red blood cells carrying oxygen and nutrition throughout your body, or the animals or mammals or insects or birds, because they're more susceptible to pathogen or to radiation than humans. Humans are too, don't get me wrong. But animals did now are more susceptible to pathogens and viruses, and they can't fight off the parasites. This is a dispersal model, by the way, of the Neptunium-239. These are hot particles. This is TEPCO's model. Now, they're telling you for decades that this is like potato chips and bananas and walking in sunshine, but it's actually not.
All I said was that it wasn't like a banana or a potato chip or walking in sunshine. That's not a crime, is it?
Apparently it actually is. Because that's what they've been doing to me for years, is trying to assassinate me. Certainly assassinated my character online for decades. Humpback whale deaths break Brazilian records, more than 130 so far this year. And when you look at these pictures, it's very clear that's an emaciated whale right there. So they've just had mass mortality in Brazil. 130 dead whales in Brazil this year, and the year is not over. A huge humpback whale, as I showed you at the beginning, there's a mass mortality event for humpback whales since 2017. And many other species, as I showed you. Was found dead on Wednesday on the beach of a luxurious residential Rio de Janeiro neighborhood, a situation that occurred more than 100 times so far this year on different Brazilian beaches, setting a countrywide record for whale deaths. 131 found as stranded. It's interesting, like to use the word stranded, that's designed to manipulate you. A dead whale is, a dead whale. It's not a stranded whale, it's a dead whale. The whole industry is disgusting. A large number of these animals died at sea and are washed up onto the beaches. Only 10% will wash up on the beaches, so around 1,300 whales died around Brazil this year. Right? And that's the consensus from the creepy academic community. Studies made of the whales' deaths this year indicate one of the causes is possibly scarcity of krill. So krill is like a big shrimp. And it can live up to 10 years, by the way. But it's a huge one, bigger than my thumb, right? Which the humpback whales will eat in the Arctic before starting their annual migration towards warmer waters to reproduce. Actually, all kinds of migratory animals will follow the krill for 5,000 miles or more and just pig out along the way. They've been changing the narrative in increments for the last 10 years, I've noticed. A good portion of dead whales that are turning up on the Brazilian beaches have been very thin. Very thin. Thin. Emaciated. Oh, and they invoke climate change, of course. Climate change. How come you're speeding? Oh, climate change. You get home late. How come you're late getting home? Oh, climate change. Oh, of course it is. This is radioactive fallout covering the entire planet. Pulsing energy every second. Oil, gas, and coal emissions don't pulse energy every second for millions of years or even for moments. Radiation fallout does, though. Not only that, but radiation fallout, it'll radiate all the trees, the leaves, it radiates all the pollen. That also pulses energy. Wherever that lands, that's going to radiate something. That's going to pulse energy. That's climate change. That is climate change. It's been going on for 75 years. And now, because of all the nuclear power plants, their fuel pools are constantly splitting the atom, hemorrhaging the radiation into the environment with no containment. And then all the nuclear dumping, all the nuclear dumps on land, all dumps in the ocean, etc., 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 right? All nuclear power plants, all their cast are vented, right? You can't contain the radiation in the cast till, 40 years later, they'll fill some casts up with argon or helium because it's not flammable per se. So the fuel, if you contain the fuel, the emissions, when you add oxygen, it'll detonate, or you add water, a lot of it will detonate, right? The sodium reactors will detonate. You can't even decommission them. They don't even know how to decommission them. If you let air in, it blows up. If you put water in, it blows up. Idiots. And so when you see these models of the radioactive fallout, that's a continuous plume covering the planet, pulsing energy every second. That is climate change. And if you're not going to call it climate change, what the hell is wrong with you, really? 5 melonhead whales washed up on a remote island, and the cause of the death is not known. Well, they look emaciated. And they got the peanut head. You see the concave peanut head? These are emblematic of being emaciated. And so those atolls are off between Madagascar and Somalia, off Tanzania. And there's a beautiful bunch of islands out there. I'm surprised that the nuclear industry didn't blow them up. Right, the nuclear industry wrecked Christmas Island, these beautiful oases, amazing paradises. And they also done to course to the Marshall Islands, the Bikini Atolls. Over 1 million square kilometers are so radioactive you can't eat anything from it. 1 million square kilometers from the nuclear testing. By the way, the plumes from that radiation are still circling the planet from those events. And then, so this place out there has a population of 100,000 people. Conservation workers. The cause of death of the melonhead whales is uncertain based on photos. There's no bite marks on the mammals. Bite marks. Why are you talking about bite marks? Oh, they were chased by. They might have been chased by bull sharks. They might have been chased by UFOs. They might have been chased by mermaids. According to National Geographic, Rupert Murdoch. Why quote Rupert Murdoch? Why would anybody want to quote that scum degenerate National Geographics for? They're a public relation firm. They got scooped up by a public relation firm. It's pointless to quote them. Oh, beaching can happen due to deceptive tidal patterns. Sickness, old age, pollution, noise pollution, overfishing. National Geographics. They starved to death. How about that? Radiation is in their body and they can't produce enough oxygen anymore because they're only producing white blood cells. They're highly social and are known to occur usually in pods of 100 to 500, blah, blah, blah. Mystery is 160 melonhead whales wash up on the Japanese beaches. This is 2015, by the way. I went back I seen that, and I said, well, I might as well throw that into the equation too. They washed up along a 6-mile stretch. So they didn't all follow each other up on the same beach. You're talking about a 6-mile stretch in a nuclear wasteland. Right? Do you get it? A bear eats a 16-year-old. A bear eats a 16-year-old after attacking tourist group in Russia. And Russia's right behind Japan, right? An adult tourist survives after stabbing the bear in the neck with a penknife and playing dead. Oh, I'm sure that's what happened, for sure. But actually, if you look at the animal's easy. It's emaciated, not almost emaciated. It's like that polar bear to the right. You don't have to guess that it's emaciated. You look at it and you're like, yeah, that's emaciated. Not maybe, not almost. No, that's emaciated. Damn, I mean. And so there's over 3,000 of them are emaciated, apparently. Starving bear shot dead. Here's another one. Starving bear shot dead after eating a teenager. So that's another emaciated bear. But a bear mostly eats berries and grass and roots is 90% of its diet. Do you get it? They're emaciated because you have so much radiation bioaccumulated in their body, right? They can't, they don't have any red blood cells anymore. They have leukemia. And in desperation, they're going to try to eat some meat. That's the trigger, right? You know how it works, right? The bear likes meat. Now, polar bear is different. It doesn't eat a lot of berries per se, but it does in the summertime and the spring. It does actually eat a lot of berries. In the wintertime, it likes to eat seal because there's no berries. But in the summertime, it can get a really healthy amount of like those partridge berries and cranberries and everything else, right? People urge to stay away from dead whales. This only in United Kingdom will you hear this. Oh, there's a health effect, health risk after it washes up. There is no health risk. We would have seen it worldwide if it was true, see? But what it is that they want to recover the vomit from the whales. This is what they're actually up to down there. It could be worth up to $1 million. So they want the population to go away so you don't see them cutting it open to get at the vomit. It's actually what they're up to. Her Majesty's Coast Guard. By the way, all mammals that wash up on the coast belong to the Queen in the United Kingdom. And last year, or the year before it came out, roughly, because only 10% of the whales are found, they found around 5,000 dead whales and mammals in the last few years. So they estimated 50,000 marine mammals, whales and dolphins and porpoises and seals, have died just in the last few years. Because you're only going to find 10%, right? And that's clearly emaciated humpback whale. It's clearly emaciated. Which is, right, and they had at one point they had 100, I can't remember the name of the whales for top in the United Kingdom right now, beak whales, in just a short period of time in different stages of decomposition. So when that's 10% is what is going to wash up and be found. Lots of it would have washed up other places, but people didn't find it, right? And so it's at least 1,000 whales would have died in just a very short period, a couple of weeks period. It's extraordinary, really. They estimated it was 50,000 died during the last couple of years. And the majority of these recovered, right? They were emaciated. This time to report on a dead whale on the beach to the north. Members of the Coast Guard team were called in to attend the incident. Like, United Kingdom media is just gross, is the only way to describe them. They're actually gross. They're gross people. Following the sad discovery, the teams, I love the United Kingdom people, but the media is just they're gross. The team are warning people to steer clear from the area due to health hazards. We hear this all the time with United Kingdom stories. And with anyone found to be interfering with the body told they may face criminal proceedings. Not may, they will. The United Kingdom police, they're literally, they look for the dumbest person per 1,000. They'll interview 1,000 people. Whoever's the stupidest, that's who actually gets hired in the United Kingdom. Not making it up. I got nothing against the idiots. They just get that job. Anyone found to be interfering with the body, except for them, right? You're not even allowed to go near it. New Zealand, story today will cover coming up. New Zealand. It's a crime now in New Zealand to go look at whales. Northumberland Country Council is arranging for the disposal of the carcass from the beach. Measurements and photography was taken and information passed on to the receiver of wreck, which is Her Majesty the Queen, right? So a whale is considered a receiver for the receiver of wrecks. Wow. Decomposing whales pose a significant health hazard from bacteria, which is simply not true. By the way, whales are royal fish and the property of the receiver of the wreck. Our royal fish are owned by Her Majesty the Genocide Queen. Why are so many whales dying on California beaches? Duh. Well, first off, that's emaciated. Look at it. My God. I mean, seriously. And we've been covering this for years now. And they're literally almost every story is emaciated whales, particularly the grey whales. But the scumbag media is trying to misdirect you. So they're trying to blame the emaciated whales on ship strikes and stuff like that. But in reality, what we're seeing is they're emaciated. That's actually that's the consensus. We've been covering this for years. Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. And so animals and mammals and birds and insects are not immune to radiation. In fact, they're more susceptible. So when you look at the tail, that's not a tail, that's emaciated. That's actually unequivocally emaciated. And you don't got to be a marine biologist to know the difference. In May, 7 gray whale carcasses landed on the beaches. 6 others stranded whales in April. They were dead whales. Whales seem to be dying faster in the water and sinking, so the true number isn't even clear. And we know that for every one that washes up, another 10 whales can die offshore and never be seen. And the total population of the species along the coast dropped by more than 7,000 animals, or a quarter of the population, in the last 4 years. 7,000, they're just talking about gray whales in a 4-year period. 7,000. And almost every story had one thing in common. It was emaciated. And they're trying to, the British, they're disgusting, the British. Oh, sonar! Yeah, but sonar has been around for 70 odd years. We would have seen a consensus of similar strandings for 70 years. It's not, in fact, there's more sonar, right? I just despise the British authorities. They're disgusting. We've covered them for so many years. It's impossible not to have contempt for them if you're doing what I'm doing. It's impossible. It's zero respect for them. If I was driving along in Britain and seeing any of the British authority dying on the side of the road, I would not stop. They are despicable, disgusting parasites. They really are. And I'm not being mean, I'm being honest. They are disgusting parasites. Scientists still don't know why so many whales are dying. Well, climate change! Maybe part of the problem. As I explained earlier, I showed you how radiation fallout is climate change. And when you hear climate change, this is a scumbag buy-in, right? This is where the media puts scumbag in there in the hopes you're going to get some advertisement by putting climate change there. It's despicable. It's obviously radioactive fallout. Research in Mexico have shown that many whales are now skinnier than they should be. When they're malnourished, they're more susceptible to human-caused impacts. What a bitch. When they're malnourished, they may be more susceptible to... Well, what do you think made them malnourished, you dumb bitch? You disgusting bitch. Excuse the language, I apologize. Sometimes I kind of lose it. I'm disgusted with people on this planet. The apologists. I'm disgusted with them. And sometimes I lash out. I apologize for having human emotions. I know I'm not allowed to, but it hasn't been possible to determine the cause of death for all the emaciated whales that have stranded on California beach this year, but many were clearly hit by ships. I grew up on the ocean, basically, my whole life. 14,000 hours under the ocean as a commercial diver. And I come from a history of 400 years on the ocean. And if you tell those people that you're worried your boat is going to hit a whale, they'll laugh you silly. Whales are not stupid. They actually got eyeballs and all kinds of sensory. But your media, they're stupid. Unfortunately, they're not washing up on beaches dead. They're actually writing stories. And so a dead whale is floating. And when you got 100 washed up, 1,000 was out there floating around, and a ship strikes one, does it mean that the ship killed it? Or that the ship struck a whale that didn't get out of the way? Because that's what we're seeing. This bizarre connotation of ship strikes it's new. For about 3 years now, we're seeing them constantly trying to attribute these unusual mortality events to ship strikes. So 7,000 gray whales died this year, or in the last 4 years. This is an unusual mortality event. And the media is out there blaming it on your tin cans, your pop bottles, and ship strikes. Solving the climate change end of the problem, that's something that is happening. You can't stop the nuclear meltdowns. That is climate change. You feel like you got to go read a book whenever you read their stories because you feel stupid. You literally feel stupid after you read mainstream media now. You end up with a headache when you read the mainstream media. This is climate change. This is radioactive fallout from Japan. You can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or feel it or pick it up or throw rocks at it. It's pulsing energy for very long distances at the speed of light. Well, almost the speed of light. Every second. Oil, gas, coal emissions don't pulse energy. That's how they're tricking you. Nuclear does. They're like, oh, nuclear doesn't have any carbon into the environment. It has no planet heating emissions. It's 100% planet heating emission. Nuclear is climate change. It's 100%. You can trace it all the way back to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. About the scumbag author, Peters is a staff writer of Fast Company who focuses on solutions for some of the world's biggest problems from climate change. Really? I didn't see any solutions in this for climate change. The author is a parasite, obviously. Previously, the bitch worked for UC scumbag Berkeley, pro-nuclear Berkeley, degenerate Berkeley, piece of shit Berkeley that I've covered for years and years. Yes, seals not to blame. Now, my nephew has been out on the ocean every day for the last 4 weeks here in Newfoundland. And all of his buddies too, and haven't got a single codfish. And so the locals who don't know any better and been hyped up by this scumbag media are trying to blame the seals. I talked to fisheries that they're all skinny, the ones they are finding. You see the wrinkle on the neck of that seal, by the way? When you see a wrinkle, and all of them got wrinkles, they're starving. They're not supposed to have any wrinkles whatsoever. And so when you see that, that means they're not healthy. And we've seen this incredible die-off of seals for about 6-7 years now. Incredible mass die-offs. And newborns we've seen at 100% rates. The Federal Fishery Department is trying to shed more light on seal impact or lack thereof on Newfoundland and Labrador struggling cod stocks. Now, they took down my site a few weeks ago, right? Google did. But I had covered stories like last year, for instance, about the cod stocks from the DFO here on the East Coast. And what they were saying was that if they shut down all the drag and all the fisheries, the cod stocks last year would only be, if they shut down everything permanently, the cod stocks could only recover to about 16% of where they should be. They didn't shut it down. They kept it open. Because they're going to disappear due to Fukushima, so they just kept going until he disappeared. And now they're going to blame it on tin cans, pop bottles, and your cardboard. So the spotlight should be on the ocean's changing ecosystem and climate change. When you say climate change, without saying what climate change is, it means you're a piece of shit. It's a major ecological shift has been happening in our waters, Stenson. This is a apologist for the industry, basically. My brother-in-law was a federal fishery officer. He's retired now. So fisheries will never tell you the truth under any circumstances. They're compartmentalized. I've talked to two in the last few weeks out on the trail, and they told me horror stories about the species. They spoke freely because they realized I was a researcher out doing species count. So they actually spoke openly with me, and they seen a incredible. They said this, the squid this year are the skinniest and tiniest they've ever seen in history, recorded in history. One guy told me he's been at it over 30 years. Another guy was at it about 16 years. And they were saying the same things about the insects have disappeared for the most part, that most of the species in the ocean have disappeared. And I said to him, when was the last time you seen a flock of birds flying? And they're like, yeah, I know. He said, we noticed it. But what are you going to do about it? He said, the spotlight should be on the ocean's changing ecosystem. No, the spotlight should be on Fukushima radioactive fallout. Shit for brains. You can't come up with a solution if you don't appreciate there's actually an issue. If you don't acknowledge there's that issue and you're going to play games, there is no hope for anything. Lying means you're not going to have no pension in a couple of years. You're talking yourself out of a future. They also have been blaming for declining crab stocks. They're talking about the seals, but that's not what's going on. As for the cod off the province's northeast coast, whose collapse forced Ottawa to declare a fishing moratorium, right? Because we had 30,000 hooks back then and 120 gill nets. And I went down to the boat one day and with the crew, and they came up to me and gave me a piece of paper and said, fishery's closed. Don't go out there. I said, well, I got gear in the water. He said, okay, we'll go out and bring it in, but don't bring the fish with you. Said availability of capelin, with their boat cod and seal love to eat. The real factor is the availability of capelin. They're small, silvery fish. Now, we know the capelin this year were tiny, and the squid are tiny. In fact, the squid are rolling down our dish, or something they've never seen before. And capelin, they feed on the zooplankton. Zooplankton feeds on the phytoplankton. The phytoplankton was basically exterminated from the radioactive plumes, from the Fukushima radioactive plumes, because the phytoplankton live at the surface, right? That's the food chain. Mystery illness is killing songbirds, are dropping dead in surrounding states. Nobody seems to know why. Now they're saying take down your bird feeders. They acknowledged that wasn't it, right? Low-level radiation appears to have immediate effect on bird populations. Areas surveyed are mostly still open to humans, but they're worse than expected. More pronounced in Chernobyl. So radiation highly affects the birds. Mysterious illness killing songbirds in 8 states, 8, 9, 10 states. There is no safe level of radiation for humans. Therefore, there's no safe level of radiation for insects or birds, which eat it. A lot of them eat insects, by the way. And then plants will suck up the radiation, so the seeds are radioactive. Allowing radiation standards are based on benefit, not safety. So the International Atomic Energy Agency, its model for safety is based on natural emitters, not the anthropogenic man-made radiation. This is an incredible revelation. In other words, the International Atomic Energy Agency is a bullshit agency. They're basing it on bananas and potato chips, walking in the sunshine. You can't conflate that with man-made emitters. We have terrorist laws for man-made stuff. We don't have terrorist laws for bananas and potato chips. But hey, give them time, they probably will. They're kooky enough, you know what I mean? A group of songbirds recently turned up dead from mysterious illness. Is not an isolated case. Delaware, 8 other states, Washington, Delaware. It's killing a wide range of birds. You remember now, last year, right, there was millions of birds dropping dead. They were trying to blame it on forest fires. They were trying to blame it on the cold front. The birds were all emaciated. It was 190 species. 190 species. And a lot of those were in areas where there was no forest fire. There was no adverse weather conditions. But they're public relation from perpetual lawyers for the industries now. The illness is killing a wide range of species, and the disorder is marked by swollen eyes with a crusty discharge and erratic flights and stumbling. Emblematic of radiation poisoning, by the way. Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Indiana, Ohio, Florida. They're being tested and found negative for toxins and parasites, bacterial diseases, and viral infections. They all become inconclusive. No, they were negative. Blue jays, European starlings, common grackles, the American robin, the northern cardinals, house finches, house sparrows, eastern bluebirds, red-bellied woodpeckers, Carolina chickadees. And we're seeing the same here. The birds are all actually missing. We just only found at best less than 5 species. Out on the ocean, the second last trip on the ocean a few weeks ago, in one day I found 5 dead birds. One of them had a tumor for a head, had one eyeball, had a little section that was normal, but the rest of the head was a tumor. Right? I covered that, and with video too, right? And pictures. 8 and counting, Vernon's herons dying from the heat. Yeah, Fukushima is heating up the planet. That radiation is pulsing energy every second. Coal, oil, and gas doesn't do it. Climate change is radioactive fallout. All nuclear power plants, and the nuclear industry has captured your regulators, it captured your universities, it captured your media, captured key positions in the government in increments over decades. Their children had children, and their children got the job, and their children got the job, and their children got the job. And the current generation in the universities and the media and government agencies have been seeded by the nuclear industry. And they're cold, man. They got no emotions. The only way you can describe them is the entitled lot. And they'll murder everything. They'll murder all of us for their paycheck each day. They'll murder everything on the planet to get their paycheck. And they'll do that till everything is gone, including themselves. They'll keep going till they're dying. Oh, did my paycheck come in from the nuclear industry? Yeah, okay, tell Ma I love her. Bury me alongside a Pa. The heat wave has killed at least 8 of the Vernon's treasured great blue herons. We're seeing them down here. We've never seen them before. While efforts are underway to save more. Not many, right? Last year we've seen a couple. The birds are literally dropping from the trees due to the temperatures. They're just dropping. Study finds Fukushima worse than Chernobyl on the bird population. Dramatically elevated DNA mutation rates and extinctions. Insect life significantly reduced. Immediate consequences of radiation. Radiation is an extinction event for the species. State confirms the number of dead songbirds soaring disease research Lawrence County. State now confirms the number of counties with dead songbirds has more than doubled since Friday. Dead birds have also been found in Kentucky, Illinois, Ohio, Maryland, Virginia, Washington, D.C., West Virginia. Says received nearly 1,200 reports to the portal. That's roughly double the number of reports they received last week. Birds are showing signs of neurological illnesses, including swollen eyes with crusty discharges, respiratory trouble, blood from the mouth, internal bleeding, weakness. These are all emblematic, by the way, of radiation illnesses. Death often seems to come quickly to the affected birds. It seems to be a virus, but they haven't been able to find out one or identify it. And like they got microscopes for a long time, right? If there's a virus there that doesn't belong there, they have no problem identifying it, getting it. If they can't identify it, they'll take pictures of it and circulate it throughout the academic community. If it existed before, someone will identify it. If it's a mutation of a known virus, they'll identify it. That's how it actually works in the real world, okay? You rule out avian influenza West Nile virus, which was the cover-up originally for Fukushima die-offs. They were blaming it on West Nile because it mutates pathogens and viruses. Tense moment for families. Orca pushes and spins a boat for over 10 minutes. These are extraordinary. We've seen this a number of times in the last couple of years. I spent most of my life on the ocean. I've never seen nothing like it. I've been around orcas half my life. I've never seen nothing like it. Or even heard tell of anything like it. Some of the possibilities for behavior is trying to flush out prey, curiosity, aggression, picking their noses, play, enrichment, got diarrhea, communication or behavior communications, and orca language we don't know or may never truly understand. Whoever wrote that shouldn't be allowed to ever write something again. They really shouldn't. Whoever wrote that their parents should be sued for not suffocating them when they were born. British yacht crew feared they would sink and drown. Of course, the United Kingdom media, my God. Let me fix the Geiger counter. My apologies, I didn't realize it was tilted. I had no idea it was tilted. I apologize. Some days I'm slack, I notice. Some days I'm not. British yacht crew feared he would sink and drown as 30 killer whales attacked the boat. 30 killer whales did not attack the boat. Scum, degenerate United Kingdom media. United Kingdom media is revolting. It's literally revolting. 30 whales weren't bashing the boat, okay? They were playing, a couple of them were playing with the rudder. But the degenerate United Kingdom media, they'll do anything for a click. Literally, they'll kill their own child, blame it on a ghost so they can get a few clicks on their webpage. Canada announces big cuts to the commercial fishing to protect the wild salmon. They've made much more stranger stuff. Remember a few years ago? Oh, my apologies, bear with me. Some technical difficulties there. A few years ago, they wanted to kill them all. And they did, right? They killed a lot of them, right? And then some other jokester wanted to take the dead sea lions and cook them and sell them. Remember those stories? We covered them, right? Canada's slashing and closing the commercial coastal fishing on more than 100 salmon stocks and permanently downsizing the fleet. Now, when I was out there doing research expeditions, they weren't getting any salmon. They're happy to get rid of the license. They can't pay off their boats because there's no salmon. And stating that the Pacific salmon are, and now they also blame the beers are emaciated because there's less salmon, but 90+% of the beer's diet is grass and grubs and roots and berries and stuff like that. It's clear if you follow this, if you go through the cycle that we've been doing for many years, that the media hates us. They despise humans and all the species. They actually hate us. Their job is to protect certain industries, like the nuclear in particular. Pacific salmon, stating Pacific salmon are in long-term decline, with many runs on the verge of collapse. And bizarre Ministry of Fisheries, Oceans and Canadian Coast Guard announced Tuesday Bold action is needed now to stabilize and rebuild stocks. You can't rebuild the stocks. Fukushima is killing the small fry, the smelts, before they make it back into the ocean. There's no glaciers to keep the rivers up anymore. They won't even acknowledge that. We've done the expedition to show the glaciers are actually missing all along the Pacific. You need that cold water coming down to regulate the temperature in the rivers and the streams where the salmons are too. Without it, the streams and rivers are going to heat up and you're going to have hypoxia. They're going to suffocate for lack of oxygen because you don't have the cold water bringing oxygen down the mountains. Duh. Salmon managers on the U.S. side of the border, scum, are taking steps in an effort to respond to the dwindling salmon stock. Well, you got no glaciers in your mountains because of Fukushima. And I'd done interviews with CBC, and when I started talking about the glaciers, I gotta go, and they hung up on me. Including increasing fundings to certain hatcheries to increase production. It doesn't matter though, you haven't got the cold water coming down the estuaries, the rivers. So then, right, because all the species, freshwater species, are dependent on that cold water coming down in the summertime to raise the level so that the salmon can make it back up the hatch. But it's no good because the river is too hot. So is the coastlines. Because that cold water from the glaciers used to regulate the temperatures along the coastline too. Scumbags. Death by Design had a National Park Services experiments on Tool elk. They're like, we covered stories where the parks or wildlife management physically goes out and kills millions of animals each year. But Google took down my main site a few weeks ago, so I can't direct you to that stuff. We learned that hundreds of elk inside the preserve are dying in agony from starvation and thirst and eating poisonous plants. They're trapped in an ecological hellscape operated by a bureaucracy that fences the animals away from forage and water for political reasons. Keeping the animals away so farmers can have some water, because they don't got no glaciers to fill up the reserves. And that National Park Services at Point Reese has killed the elks, often in torturous ways, in medical experiments for decades. And that the federal agency absolves itself of any moral responsibility by blaming nature. If only that was true. Thousands of elks have lived there in Tomales Point elk preserves, confined behind a woven wire fence. Their principal predator is the Park Service. My God, eh? The plaintiffs are demanding that Tomales Point fence be removed because it is illegally killing the elk through forced starvation, dehydration. And more lawsuits are likely as more facts about the historical treatment of the two elk comes to light. The park personnel have defined scientific practices by euthanizing scores of healthy elk bulls and pregnant cows as a way of testing for diseases, a syndrome that can be tested by non-lethal techniques. There's no incentive not to be evil. See, there's no accountability. Rangers have chased elk cows with helicopters, hobbled and drugged them, and inserted radio transmitters into their vaginas. Rangers. That word is like dirt now. Rangers. All of the necropsized elk were severely emaciated. Either died of starvation or by plant poisoning brought about by starvation. Well, they're eating the tips of the plants, and the radiation is sucked up through the plants. At the very tips are the very worst. Like pine needles used to make a tea out of pine needles, for instance. But pine needles in Japan are so radioactive that they won't let people drink it anymore. and then mushrooms and stuff like that. The last thing you want to eat is a mushroom. I haven't eaten a mushroom now in over a decade. There's zero possibility of me eating mushrooms again, ever. They're the worst for bioaccumulating radiation. 12 polar whales beach in East China, right behind Fukushima. 3 died. And they all would have died if the locals didn't go hardcore. Bless their hearts, eh? Amazing, actually. 12 polar whales were found stranded in tidal flats, eastern China. Now, I went out, there was 15 stranded here in Newfoundland in January, was it? Yeah. I had to go 850 kilometers to get there. When I get there, because it wasn't made public, by the way, it happened 35 days before that. They were still up on the beaches, dead carcasses, didn't decay, and they had at least 2 weeks of good weather where they should have decayed, but they didn't. There was no birds feeding on them. I talked to about 15 of the locals, and a bunch of there's 15 dead whales didn't even make it into the media. So for 15 whales to wash up meant 150 of the pilot whales must have died along that coastline. And there was half a dozen of them have washed up right alongside the main road. This is in a little community, by the way. And Fisheries and Oceans wouldn't remove them. And so the children didn't want to go to school anymore because the school bus drove past the dead whales every morning on the way back at the end of school. And they had nightmares. They couldn't sleep at nights. So the locals got together one day with their quads and 4x4s, went down and dragged the whales down to the coastline and watched them float away. Some of them washed back up further down the coastline. But if you want to know why they died, the best people to talk to is the International Atomic Energy Agency. They know why the whales died. They're the genocide machine themselves. Yeah. Around 150 people taking part in the rescue effort. Bless their hearts, eh? They built shelters for the whales. I mean, they went all out. Isn't that something? Because most people were like, the Chinese, they would have went down there with some rice and started eating them while they were alive, Dana. No, they actually rescued them. And they got to live up to 60 years. They're not stupid if they live for 60 years, folks. They dug deep holes, put sunshades over the whales. Brilliant, actually. And scumbag marine experts said the whales may have become stranded when chasing fish. Every time they quote marine experts, usually the first thing comes out of their mouth is climate change. They're not experts. They got the education to be perpetual liars. I know that might sound incredible to some people, but it's actually true. A staff member from Fisheries Administration said he might have become stranded due to failure of navigation system. Failure of their navigation system. They should put a tracker up his anus, like to do with the elk. So you can follow Mr. Stupid around, do a study on him. Mink whales, of course, there's still a mass mortality event for them. Found dead in Rhode Island. Rhode Island's got a lot of dead whales this year. Last year and the year before and the year before that too. No clear pictures. Looks like it's very skinny to me. Oh, that picture shouldn't be there. My apologies. Responded from the Mystic Aquarium. Why are you bringing an aquarium into the equation? They're an aquarium, for goodness sakes. Animal rescue program. Yeah. Arrived at the site off the coast of Rhode Island where the whale was spotted. And you notice now, all the states in the last 5 or 6 years have a stranding network, a stranding organization, animal rescue organization. All of them are funded by NOAA, by the way. And anybody else, once they show up, NOAA, which is them, is funding it. Once they show up, their subsidiaries, they'll literally arrest you if you go near it. They don't want you taking pictures, because I'll find them and I can tell you right away whether it's emaciated or not. They're going to relocate the carcasses on the shore where additional tests will perform an necropsy, aka autopsy. The environment where these whales live is changing rapidly due to the impact of human activity and climate change. And of course, climate change is radioactive fallout. Covers the whole planet. This is a model of Fukushima covering, but it only stopped after a short period of time. The model did. The radiation didn't stop dispersing. It's a continuous plume covering the entire northern hemisphere, everything. A continuous plume. Imagine if that was a snowstorm. A continuous snowstorm covering the entire northern hemisphere. One big, gigantic snowstorm covering the entire northern hemisphere. You friggin' well you figure it out then, wouldn't you? Like, wow, that thing is huge. Covering half the entire planet with a continuous snowstorm. Well, it is, except it's radiation and it's invisible. It's still a snowstorm of radiation, though. It's climate change. According to the scum-degenerate National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, aka Monsters, there have been over 100 minke whale strandings reported since 2017. There's actually a mortality event. It's a lot more than that. Pygmy sperm whale washes ashore on Surfside Beach. Pygmy sperm whale. So young whales and young animals and children, for instance, humans, are much more susceptible to radiation. And because their mother's milk is going to be highly radioactive, you expect to see, that's very, very skinny, by the way. You expect to see a lot of that, and we do, right? It's extraordinary how much we're actually seeing. So there's some bruising on the whale caused by beach and other cuts, but none of that would have contributed to the animal becoming dead, aka stranded. She noted that the whale did appear thin. Appeared thin. Doesn't appear thin, it is thin. They're usually great big fat little chummy things at this stage. Thin. They are deep water species and you do not typically see them along the coastline. 2 whales beached in Rocky Point last week caused concern. Yeah, that's emaciated. That's a fin. That's another fin whale, eh? Just days later, a whale initially believed to be the same one was found dead, but scientists say there were 2 different whales. It is absolutely unusual. Same week, 2 whales in non-regular season. And the season for those whales is December to April, not now. To see them in these waters during this time of the year and for 2 to become beached in 1 week is an aberration that requires further study. The first one was 10 meters long, about 3 years old, good health. And the second one was a female, 12 foot long. Good health. Really? Shows a picture, I'll tell you. Beached, a baby orca sparks New Zealand whale hunt. Yeah, that was a strange story, eh? Because we've seen stories of the mother orcas carrying the dead carcasses of baby orcas around on their snout for 17 days straight. They don't just abandon them, so they must have died. It has an orca tattoo, but he says, I grew up watching Free Willy. Somebody stop these people from being quoted, for God's sakes. You got a Free Willy tattoo, is it? Or you watch Free Willy and you got an orca tattoo. So that's an expert, folks. My God, we lost the planet, the morons. Mystery of 3 whales found dead on Moray Beach. Mystery. Is anything a mystery? It's only a mystery because you won't look at Fukushima as part of the equation. Tests are being done to determine. An initial survey established the rear stranding of the juveniles not due to becoming entangled in any equipment. There was no plastic found in their body. In fact, I seen a study, I covered this about 2 years ago, despite the fact they're always talking about plastic, and they do find them sometimes in whale because there's no food out there, so they'll eat anything because they're emaciated. But no whale has actually died from ingesting plastic. Now they might die from ingesting plastic because there's no food out there, so they'll eat anything out there. But they died of starvation, not because of the plastic. The plastic was because they were starving to death. Well, further tests are done by the Scottish Marine Animal Stranding Scheme. And so the Scottish Marine, this is, again, these are the goblins. Always the goblins. And they'll blame it on climate change right away. Has to remit to examine incidences to determine the underlying cause of the events and direct indirect roles humans played. So they're blaming humans without even looking at it. We'll figure it out as humans for sure. Probably ship strike or climate change. All I can tell you is these animal stranding groups should be ashamed of themselves for breathing the air that everybody else is breathing. They have no right to call themselves humans. Zero rights. Deep diving species, so they are sensitive underwater noises. Or they might have picked up infections. Could have been mermaids. We're giving them an enema, Dana. Of course, boy. Gee, that makes sense. That actually makes sense. Wow. I wish somebody had come up with that. Folks, we know what's killing all the whales. It's mermaids. You're giving the whales enemas. Right? That makes sense. Makes more sense than what they're trying to tell you. I think anybody that's quoted in the media should be arrested and put in jail. June the 17th, 2021. Young fin whale washes up dead. Look at him. He's emaciated. Big time. A juvenile emaciated whale. By the way, irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram of cesium in their diet. Irreversible heart damage. By the way, it's permanent lesions to the organs of adults with 50 becquerels a kilogram of radiation in their diet. Japan is shipping food at, oh my God, levels. Japan is disgusting what they're doing. It's despicable. And so when you see pre-Fukushima, the numbers were 1 to 2 per million with thyroid tumors. Now you're seeing 13,646, not out of a million, when it used to be 1 to 2 per million, but out of 40,000, which is the equivalent of 360,000 out of a million, when it used to be 1 to 2 per million. So these stats are easy transferable to the marine world and the animal world and the insect world. Because humans are not the only things that are affected by radiation. All right? Okay? I'm only telling you 500 more times. Coast Guard called after a whale was found dead. Coast Guard. What are you calling Coast Guard for? I always feel stupid after I do these shows. I always end up with a headache. And I always have trouble sleeping. Like, there can't be that many stupid people on this planet. All night long till I cry myself to sleep. The 15-foot-long juvenile, believed to be a sperm whale. Now, if you've ever seen a sperm whale, it's really easy to say if it's a sperm whale. Got a great big, huge mouth head to it. Harassers of resident orchids could get $1 million fine. But if you eat radioactive food from Japan, you can get $1 million worth of chemo to finish you off. Japan is growing food, look at that, right alongside the bags of radiation and harvesting it and shipping it to Canada and other countries. Harassers of orcas could face $1 million fine. You really think that they don't want you taking pictures of the emaciated whales is what's really going on here, see? Like, they're saying the whales down there are they're only eating salmon. But if there's no salmon, you really think the whale's going to go like, I'm not eating seal, there's no salmon. I'd rather starve to death. No, they're bioaccumulated so much radiation that they can't eat food. That's why they're showing up emaciated. And boaters don't follow mandatory sanctuary and approaches the distance could be fined up to $1 million and 18 months in jail. You really think that's going to change what Fukushima is doing? Like when it comes to orca, there's a group of people on this planet that thinks they own the orcas. And they'll murder everybody in their version to protect the orca. And they exist throughout the government. They're actually lunatics. They're a threat to everybody else and a threat to all the other species. In a possible world's first, a pair of white orcas were seen off of Japan. Yeah, big surprise, eh? 2 white orcas. In one of these pictures, hang on, I'll see if I can find it. One of these pictures shows 2 white orcas at the one time. There it is there, look at that. What the hell, eh? 2 white orcas. Off of Japan. What's the odds of that, I wonder? 1 million to 1 million. 1-to-1 odds. Guaranteed. Yeah, that's the strangest thing imaginable, though. 2 white orcas. We're seeing more orcas this year than usual on top of that, they said. 2 white orcas seen swimming side by side may be unprecedented in the entire world. Not maybe, it is. Killer whale was stranded on an island near the BC coast, is rescued. And you can see how sharp his ridgeline is and how skinny his tail, right around his tail is. He's probably very starving, emaciated. NOAA, scumbag NOAA, which is the U.S. federal scumbag agency responsible for marine conservation. No, they're responsible for protecting the nuclear industry. They're unbelievable degenerates. And there's nothing on the beach, just a couple of algae. That's British Columbia. There should be 7,500 highly visible species. There's 78 species of sea stars, and each species comes in multiple colors. There should be 700 algae for starters. There should be all kinds of snails and periwinkles and clams and oysters. There should be all kinds of mollusks, and there should be 74 species of sponges, highly visible colors, different colors for each species. There should be 76 species of sea anemones, highly visible. And when you look at that, you're just seeing, at best, you're seeing kelp cabbage and common kelp with the bulbs. We've done research up there for years after Fukushima. Threatened biodiversity. What can we do about the decline of insects? Shut down all nuclear power plants. The solution to all of this is to shut down all nuclear power plants. Insects are our livelihood. Some plants are in decline. Plants. Of course, plants are affected by radiation. And there's a decline in insectivore birds that eat insects. They all need the bugs. A lot of people see it as only as a beneficial insects and parasites. But insects are our livelihood and we depend on them in nature. Right. Could Fukushima bacteria produce bacteria resistant to antibiotics? because radiation is a sure way to stimulate mutations. So when you hear of bacteria being involved, you should consider Fukushima. Fukushima should be considered first for all species die off, because the models clearly show the entire northern hemisphere blanket in a continuous plume of radiation sustained. And we actually have the numbers to quantify that assessment. Ban all pesticides in UK gardens to save bees and insects, which is good, but you should shut down Sellafield reprocessing fuel facility because it contaminated all the United Kingdom and all the Arctic on top of that. We got the studies, we've covered it extensively. Petition calls for outlawing use of chemicals. You got to outlaw the use of nuclear immediately, worldwide. You got to come up with solutions to stop it from splitting the atom and hemorrhaging into the environment that exists right now. And you might as well come up with a Nuremberg type trials for academics, nuclear scientists, and we need them to be emaciated and exterminated sooner the better. They're a threat to all 8 million species and the existence of the human species. It's all predicated upon the nuclear industry, which is nuclear academics. Perpetual liars, disgusting, despicable cowards, murdering liars. A leading scumbag insect expert has called for a UK-wide ban on the use of pesticides and urban areas to protect bees, wildlife, and human health. Well, it works this way, that if you wipe out all the insects in your city and Mother Nature is in good shape, it'll repopulate it shortly after. The insects will move right in. You have so much radiation proliferated for so many decades that it's an inhospitable environment now. And the United Kingdom, the government, the academics, the nuclear industry, and their minions and lapdogs in the United Kingdom are just unbelievable. We've covered them for years. They're disgusting. I would never live in the United Kingdom. I love the United Kingdom people. I could never live there because their universities, their colleges, their so-called authority, they're the worst I've ever seen compared to anywhere else on the planet. It's a 100% police state, 100% nanny state, and 100% scumbags of inbreeds. A professor of biology at the University of Sussex said outlawing chemical spraying in the country's 22 million private gardens, along with road verges, parks, and other green spaces, could slow the insect decline. No, you can't stop it because of Fukushima, see? And all the other nuclear emissions from all the other facilities. That's the reality. Friggin' Guardian, disgusting anyway. The Irish Times, their flying friends and foes do not seem as plentiful as before. Gee, I wonder what that could be. Biologist on mutated butterflies. Study is overwhelming in its implication for humans. Japan researcher. Insects are believed to be very resistant to radiation. Turned out they're not. Irregular developed eyes, malformed antennas, smaller wings. Our flying friends to foes do not seem as plentiful. In a heat wave, we left every window open at night to trap the slightest breeze, inviting all sorts of winged invasions. Nothing came in. The clade would seem to be vanishing from can't even pronounce it, along with the swallows that need them for food. Which is what the research I'm doing here on the east coast of Canada, and I also done on the Pacific over the last decade. Every year, a massive amount of expeditions. We have identified an extinction level event, and we identified the source, which is Fukushima's nuclear meltdown. But you got to look at all the nuclear emissions, because that's an extinction event. All the nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation 24/7. All the fuel pools are splitting atoms for stupid sake. It's like when you take the fuel out of the reactor that powered 1 million homes and you put it into a pool at the top of a building, it's still splitting the exact same atoms. that we're producing power for 1 million homes every day. That's liberating to the environment as pulsing energy every second. And it's an invisible snowstorm of radiation. Pulsing energy symmetrically right around the entire planet. Uptick in washed up seabird carcasses on beaches started last week. Different species of seabirds washed onto the beaches in different communities. A dead moor reportedly found on a beach at Little Diomede. 15 dead birds on a 7.2 mile stretch of a beach. The birds were 1 horned puffin, 6 murres, 7 shearwaters, 1 kittiwake. And down here, we only seen 5 species on the ocean so far. I got to get back out there, but we got nasty weather now coming. We got very little support because there's only like a handful of you people that have kept this operation moving forward. We don't have any foundations supporting us. They're too busy supporting the cover-up. It's absurd. It's absurd. With your help, we do the very best research ever performed on this subject. Bar nobody, we perform the best. The very lowest levels of radiation are harmful to life. So if the very lowest levels are harmful to life, and we've had massive emissions covering the entire planet from Fukushima with continuous plumes, you can do the math. Scientists are still scratching their heads at the mysterious illness killing birds all over the United States. Right, they're all different species. Blue jays, robins, grackles, all other species, fledglings. We still don't know what's causing the epidemic despite extensive testing. They're not testing for radiation. Scientists call it a mortality event. They refuse to acknowledge that nuclear is able to have these types of attributes, and that's a fatal flaw. Mysterious diseases has researchers stumped. No, it doesn't have them stumped. They refuse. They know what's going on. They refuse to acknowledge it. They won't get no funding. See? Nuclear industry is so powerful that people are terrified to come out in opposition. And so the very tiny handful of people that do are beaten to death by the public relation firms. I mean, look what they've done to me. It's absurd. I'm actually a good person. I don't lie. I'm 100% straightforward. I provide the documentation as I'm talking. You got any idea how much work it is to do what I do on top of that? It's absurd. You have to work nonstop all day, every day to do what I'm doing. We have amazing 34 people on my live show. 34. Now, if I was sat here wrapping shit on a stick for fertilizer, I'd have 34,000 people on my show right now. Infectious disease found in Hawaii dolphin could spark mass marine mammal deaths. See what they're up to? By the way, infectious diseases can be, as I showed you earlier, mutated because of radiation. Could happen, but it's not. This is not. It doesn't jump the species, right? But they're saying, oh, it's going to jump all the species. There's going to be mass deaths. And it's going to be an infectious disease. Not Fukushima, but infection. Just want to throttle these people, eh? So they're sending the groundwork now to blame mass mortality events on some bizarre... They're not even researchers. They're nuclear apologists. At Jersey Shore, experts are fishing for answers. Where are the stranded sea creatures? The pre-Fukushima, the odds of finding a stranded creature was extraordinary. Post-Fukushima, if you don't find them, where the hell are they? Well, they're all dead, stupid. They're all dead. 50-strong dolphin pod moving away from stranding danger. Stranding danger. Because you got so many dying off. If they seize anything close, sure, they're going to strand and die. The nuclear industry is going to get a black eye. Dolphins rescue with help of local community after mass live stranding. They built these special buggies because they're happening so much in the last couple of years. Something is killing gray whales. Is it a sign of ocean and pearls? 7,000 in the last 4 years. It's called Fukushima. It's called Fukushima. Just want to tear my eyeballs out. Scientists have worried that 1,000 gray whales died so far this year. That was 2019. They're worried that 1,000 gray whales died because they found 100. They found 7,000, which meant 70,000 died. I'm not going to read through it because I'm just going to start yelling. Whale embryo washes ashore. Female whale possibly caught in tropical storm. So they're trying to blame the aborted fetus on a tropical storm. So where do whales go when there's storms? Is there a special harbor where they go and hide, I wonder? When you read this, you feel like there's no hope for humans. When they're printing stuff like that, they're blaming an aborted fetus from a whale on a storm. Obviously it's radiation. 6 orcas rescued from Argentina beach after getting stranded. 1 dies. That was 2019. I didn't have that story. And so I just wanted to throw it out there. 6 other were rescued. So 6 orcas stranding is extraordinary. Well, not since Fukushima, but pre-Fukushima was extraordinary. Look at these guys getting a shit kicked out of themselves. Multiple ton animal. There's people out there, and they're well placed. If an orca strands, they'll spend $1 trillion to try to save the orca. And if in the next bay there's a baby whale stranded, they won't even look at it, unless it's an orca, right? There are people out there, for some reason, when it comes to orca, they'll kill everything on the planet to protect the orca. Killer whales dying off in the Pacific Northwest. Pod of orcas spotted. How's that a headline? Not a pod of humpback whales, not a pod of gray whales, not a pod of this, not a pod of that, but a pod of orcas. It was an orca. It was amazing. My life has changed irrevocably forever and ever. I could die now and I'll be happy. I saw an orca. It was amazing. Cut off my hair and I rose straight away. California mom saves a son, 5 years old, from a mountain lion attack. This is a story we're hearing over and over and over. Where mountain lions now are trying to steal children. You got to fight the mountain lion for your kid. And coyotes too, right? Cougars. She fought the cougar off and they came and shot the cougar, and then another cougar showed up. That's not it. That's an older picture. But another cougar showed up and they tranquilized it and moved it out of there. So there was 2 cougars there hunting kids. Which is something we've seen a lot of now over the last couple of years, and we predicted years ago. Orca ushering attempt abandoned after 3 hours. Only in New Zealand, man. Only in New Zealand. So there's a kooky orca trust fund in New Zealand. Nobody's allowed to go there, only the orca trust fund. So if I start up an orca trust fund, I have more authority than the military, the police, and the government. They'll all get out of the way if they see me coming. That's what we're seeing with these orca trust funds, eh? All of a sudden, whoever, they're a private organization, and everybody gets out of the way. Oh, you're an orca trust fund. Oh, darn, I feel stupid. I better get out of the way. Can I give you my car? You want to use my car or my boat? You're an orca trust fund. Orcas remain in the harbor. Police checkpoint halts rubbernecks. Rubbernecks. So if you want to go look at an orca, you're a rubberneck. Unless you're a trust fund, right? And you're a trust fund. There they are there. There's the trust fund. Oh, sightseers. Police will drive them out of it. They're lunatics. Police also warn people of the checkpoint on social media. So cops went to social media, said a pod of orcas is currently breaching social distancing guidelines. Please don't go and do the same thing. I don't know about you, but Norman Reedus says Death Stranding sequel. This is Japanese video game called Death Stranding where they have whales beaching. Video games. We've covered this when it first came out, right? From Japan. Who's killing all the whales. PlayStation has put them on a pedestal. The waves of Fukushima are healing local surfers. Yeah, the waves of Fukushima are killing everything else on the planet. That's the plutonium fallout from Japan, radioactive dispersal around the entire planet. Where are the stranded creatures? And the collapse of seagrass beds threatens survival of marine life. Well, this is something I documented on the expeditions to Alaska, 4 to 5 months on the ocean at a time without coming home each year. And I showed all the seagrass was dying. It's obviously dying from the radiation fallout. Because radiation fallout, whether you want to accept it or not, it's actually real. And it's not just radioactive fallout either. So just before we end the show, let's talk about, just for a few seconds here. So tanks at Fukushima, and they're trying to trick you. The tanks are actually empty. If you fill the tank, one of the tanks up at 2 sieverts an hour, it's 1.4 million sieverts per tank. What that actually means, though, to the people who are not familiar with that topic, is you can't get within a football field of the tank. Now, if you got multiple tanks, you fill it up, you can't get anywhere on the site. If you fill up a tank, you can't build another tank in proximity. So when you see all them tanks, those tanks are proof that they're empty because they're all built close together. Because you would create this Bromson lung effect throughout the whole site of gamma shine, X-rays, and neutron bursts, where they hit each other and they change direction at the speed of light. The whole site would be this incredible dynamic of gamma shine and neutron bursts, which is plutonium and uranium, incredibly destructive to DNA and chromosomes. So quickly, 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. 2014, they had 1,200 tanks. 2017, they have 900 tanks. So 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,200 in 2014, 900 in 2017. And 2019, they had 1,000 tanks. 2021, they have 1,000 tanks. So they had 1,000 tanks 2013, 1,000 tanks in 2021. You really think they're filling up tanks? You really think that they didn't kill the ocean? And that their alleged filtration system that they brag about constantly, August the 12th, 2014. For the last 3 years, the system has been unused and kept out of operation. So the first 3 years are the most critical, 3 years, 5 months. There was no filtration system whatsoever. And that you couldn't even get rid of the system, you couldn't use the system because it was lethal doses. And that if you look at the numbers, of radiation, 8.7 million becquerels of tritium, which you can't find because there was 2.35 billion becquerels of cesium, and 750 million becquerels of other radioactive material. Well, first off, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel, this is 2.2 sieverts per liter. And there's 5,000 tons escaped. Let me do the math. Well, it's easy. It's 5 million. So it's 10 million sieverts. Because a liter is 2.2 sieverts. So it's over 10 million sieverts. 5 sieverts is a lethal dose. 1 gallon of this water is a lethal dose. If there's 1 gallon in the next room from where I'm to, I'd be dead before I got this far into the show. What is 5 tons going to do, I wonder? So what is 5 tons going to do? And we counted the tanks. They don't got 1,000 tanks at Fukushima. The International Atomic Energy Agency are demons. They're actual demons. You can pretend they're not all you fucking want, but they're demons. They're actual monsters. Everything in the nuclear industry is nothing but monsters. You can pretend I'm wrong, but I can prove I'm right. I'm not a bad person for doing what I'm doing, but I'm censored. Man, am I censored. Nuclear activists be constantly spied upon. Guess what? They're constantly spying upon me. I'm not a bad person for saying this is wrong. So they're pushing radioactive fishery and forestry products. They're online, and that's cinemas. So when you go to watch a movie, they're pushing nuclear food down your throat. These are lunatics. Now, if you're watching this video later and you hear things in this that makes me look bad, remember, they've been extending my videos after 12 hours, 1 hour, 48 minutes, and I got an extra 5 seconds on that video. Same thing with this video where I got 8 seconds extended on that video. 12 hours later, my videos are longer. I've been looking at other sites doing live streams. It doesn't happen to them. I'll have a collection of that to back up those assertions in the near future. I'm not seeing extension on anybody else's video, just my videos are showing up longer. This one's 11 seconds longer, and this one is 8 seconds longer. And yesterday's video was 8 seconds longer. I have the moral high ground. I'm doing everything I can, and I'm doing the best I can. The problem with me is I'm honest. That's the issue, right? Being honest is now considered a crime. So I'm recording this now as we talk, myself, and I can look for discrepancies in the video later. But also, when I upload it to other sites, this one won't be tampered with by YouTube because I have my own copy. Thank you, everybody. Good night, everybody. It's a quick shout out, I guess, to everybody. I'll say good night. Dana Nasana, yeah, they love Dana. James Olhan, hey bud, hope you're doing well. And everybody watching this later, or not in the comment section right now, hugs for you and your loved ones. I know this sounds incredible, but I'm telling you the truth about everything. Timo, good night, everyone. Danny San, Sarge. I'm doing the best I can to tell the story. I only serve one king. Hi there. Sandra Churchill. Hi, Sandra. Chuck. KDS. Just do a quick shout out if anybody can find. Andrew B. Hi, Andrew. Ted Richards. Anybody I miss? I shouldn't miss anybody because we don't have a lot of commenters tonight. Conrad. MK. John 2H. 2N. Hi, John. Jerry Goldstein. Good night, everybody. Van Horn. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up, folks, if you haven't. Did I get everybody? It looks like it. It's a tough day putting these shows together. Yesterday's show was too really difficult. Hi, Robert. Good night, everybody. Hugs to everybody else watching this later. Bless all of you and your friends and your families and your loved ones and your insects and your pets and your animals and your communities. James Lucid. Hi, James. Awesome. We got lots of people here tonight. I've been censored heavily. That's the way it goes. See everybody tomorrow night, hopefully. I was going to do a news cycle tonight, but I realized I needed to cover this topic because obviously we got a lot to cover, right? So, hi Victor, you're welcome. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. See everybody tomorrow. Have a great night, folks.